Thank you for joining us for your interviewing and elicitation, our next Competitive Intelligence Working Group presentation. Here today we have Ellen Naylor, who's going to present. She is one of the pioneers of competitive intelligence and win-loss analysis. She initiated Verizon's first CI program in 1985 and then went on to found the Business Intelligence Source in 1993. Business Intelligence Source's research and insight has consistently helped companies beat the competition and make smarter strategic decisions. Ellen is a popular speaker at conferences and webinars and universities. She's done public speaking in this field for over 25 years and has contributed to Skip's magazine and 3 books. She also published an award-winning book, Win-Loss Analysis, which examined how to capture and keep the business you want. We're very lucky to have Ellen here today. I'm really looking forward to what she presents. I'll go ahead and turn it over to her now.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time zone you're in when you're listening to this. It's Ellen Naylor here, and I am going to share my screen. This always slows me down for some reason. It's so easy to do, but somehow or another, you know, what can I say? All right, we are in the share mode. And I will also get off the video, except to say hello. And let's get off the video. Let me see, how do I do that? Actually, I'm not sure how to do that right now. Let's just move along. Okay, so let's move on to the first thing. So a little bit more of an introduction. I'll start out with that since it's not just all about work. Relationships are based on who we are. So I was born and raised in Yokohama, Japan, and in an international community. And as was my family, my parents met and married there in occupation Japan. So then I went to St. Moore's Catholic school, all girls, very strict Catholic school, uniforms, the whole 9 yards. It's changed a lot since then. Next year it will be celebrating its 150th anniversary, which is quite a milestone. A lot of schools don't last that long. Then when I was 15, I moved to the US, went to a couple of high schools, graduated, had great grades, but didn't really connect. And so I am in touch with everybody from my old school and nobody from my 2 high schools I went to here in the US in my junior and senior years. So I graduated and went to Notre Dame, and which was just starting to admit women. I was in the 2nd graduating class of women. In fact, I had told my family when I was about 6th grade, when my brother was getting into Notre Dame, that I planned to go there too, and they told me, but they don't let women in. And I just skipped around and said they will. Of course, I had no idea what I was talking about. Okay, so then after a couple of years of working in retail, which really sucked, it's terrible hours, and you bah humbug all the holidays, and I admire people who can do it, but I found out I wasn't one of them. I went to the University of Virginia's Darden School, got an MBA, and met my wonderful husband, whose picture is here with me 40 years later, down below. And so after I graduated, I started work with what was then C&P Telephone, which then was part of AT&T. It was before the first modified final judgment. MCI was still a company who was behind that. So it does date me a little bit. And then it was pre-Verizon, to say the least, right? So I went through a lot of history with them, 9 years. So I was in sales for a few years, where my accounts changed every single year, and what we could sell or not changed every single year also because of the divestiture, initial divestiture. But it was a great learning experience, and I also started their first competitive intelligence function because I wanted to, and they allowed me to do it. So I felt very lucky. I was 29 years old at the time and full of myself, and really enjoyed the work. Nobody was there to tell me what to do because nobody had ever done it before. So think about that as a nice opportunity in a big company with money. Great stuff. And then I went to Northwest Airlines because my husband got a wonderful promotion at his computer company, Cray Research. So we relocated to the right cool Minnesota, and I got a job with Northwest Airlines. It didn't last very long, politics, but that's okay. And so after I was laid off, though, we did take advantage of traveling for 3 months. And the best thing of the traveling was I went back to Japan for the first time in 21 years with my husband. Spent 3 weeks there, 3 luscious weeks there. reconnected with a lot of friends and saw parts of the country I hadn't seen before. And well, it opened my eyes up, and I knew I could not go back and work for a corporation again, because I was actually looking at Medtronic at the time, and I went back, and that was the end of that. So I worked with another small company for about a year before starting my own company in 1993, the Business Intelligence Source. More people just know it as Ellen Naylor because I have no employees, but I work virtually, and I hire people as needed for jobs. There's plenty of consultants out there like me who are always looking for work and who are very good. So, and I started in cold calling because back in 1993, that was a great way to make a living and to do competitive intelligence. People picked up their phone. We did not have the internet like we do today. There was no social media. And people told you a lot of things over the phone without even thinking about it. Well, times have changed. And with social media, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, there's competitive intelligence all over it. So no more cold calling. It has to be a warm call today. And you kind of have to say who you are because they'll look you up on LinkedIn anyway, right? So, but there's, on the other hand, to the point of interviewing and elicitation, you can look up the people you're going to talk to ahead of time on LinkedIn and or other various means and find out things about them to establish rapport. So you didn't get to do that when you cold call. You had no idea what they were like, their personality, their hobbies, nothing. There's a very good background for what I do today because it's such an improvement today. And I evolved into workshops over time. I've been doing them actually for about 20 years, but with corporations probably for about 15. And I wrote my book, Win-Loss Analysis, and who knows, in the midst of all this, I may write another one, since I think this coronavirus is going to last for a while. It's a stay-at-home kind of thing. I've been working out of my home for about 27 years, so this is nothing new to me. And so for those of you who are listening, if you need any tips about setting up a home office, I'm happy to help you. And my last photo here is me and my beloved Rogers in a recent trip to the Grand Canyon in February on the way back from our art festival in Arizona. I'm so glad we took the scenic route home since I guess there's not going to be too much traveling for a while. Okay, on with, whoops, I guess it didn't like that. It liked that. Okay, and I just realized, hi, there we go. I didn't put us in the right mode there. Okay, so this is the environment I understand from Jamie that you work in. You're answering pretty major pieces of business, whether it's commercial or government or industry, and it's RFPs, so it's these are for real. These are not just simple proposals. There's always competition. So I thought, here are the ways you can use interviewing and elicitation based on what it is you do for a living. And I'm sure there's other ways, but I'm just thinking about the RFP process. So pre-RFP, who's going to be part of the competitor's team? Or there's probably more than one competitor, but you get the gist. Who has been part of that competitor's team historically? And how well did they work together? Have there been changes in their management? Have there been changes in their focus or their strategy since then? Since a lot of these RFPs get responded to 5 years ago and things change, as you all know. Who's their decision-making team? Who do you think is going to carry the most weight? Is it truly, a decision by 4 or 5 or 20 people, or is it really one person who is the key driver? And this is not the easiest information to find out, but you can find it out. And what's the motivation behind this RFP? And what's their motivation around their decision-making? You know, like, what are the most important things? Of course, price always counts, but you know, there's always other things like delivery, reputation, financial stability. You know, there's lots of different factors they look at. What really matters? So during the RFP, I figured the only thing you can really do is ask questions for clarification without showing your hand as to why you're asking that question, because the competition's probably looking at that. The other thing you can do, though, is if the competitor asks a question and you're doing it orally, you can right on the spot ask another one based on what they just asked. So you want to be prepared for that too, not just be so prepared and canned, but be spontaneous. And these skills that we're going to talk about will help you be more spontaneous. And lastly, how's the solution working? And customers are quite happy talk to you about how the solution is working because the decision has already been made. So there's a lot to setting up an interview. I'm just going to hone in on the things I think are the most important. And I think the first one is, of course, you have your questions, but you want to reword them to motivate the customer to want to answer, to want to participate. So put yourself at their end. If it was you, even though you're different people, there's a certain amount of human nature that goes along here. So, for example, some of the questions I really like to ask is, what was your impression of competitor A at the outset? And how did that change, or did it change over time? Instead of asking a more direct question about, hey, tell me the reason why you went with them or something like that. You just want to, it gets people talking. I'll just say that. I do this all the time in win-loss interviews, and that's mostly what I do. I don't work in your space as much, but I still also do research, and I do a limited amount of cold calling. Comes up every time, every now and again. So a couple of other ones that work pretty well is, what did the winning team offer that really set them apart? Rather than asking directly, what were the 3 reasons you went with competitor A? What did the winning team provide? People are comfortable with that, because it's neutral territory. Okay, so you want to start broadly and then work your way to the more narrow, precise questions. So, start broadly with things like, what solution were you using previously? When did you start looking? What prompted you to start looking for another solution? Just very open-ended sorts of questions. And the narrow ones, of course, pricing. That's probably the narrowest one we have, right? And if you're asking consumers, a lot of times, age, right? But I notice by the end of the interview, they're happy to tell me their age, even though a lot of times I'll bracket because they might not either. So we want to have some idea. Okay. And how do you end the interview? You want to think about that too, because you want to leave a good impression and you want to be professional. So in my win-loss interviews, I end the interview with, besides the thank you, etc., for your time, the question before that often is there anything I missed that you would like to talk about that's important to you? And a lot of times we've covered everything, but we haven't always. The other thing they'll do is they'll reiterate and add to some of the information they've already shared with me. And so, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to find out as much as you can. But the thank you is the way you end every single one of them. Thank you for your time. Okay, getting grounded. So the very first thing I do, even before I get grounded, is I think about what is my intention for this call in a broad way, not I want to get this information. And my intention for all my calls is I want the person I'm talking to feel better about themselves than they did when we first said hello. And this might sound like wish-wash, but I tell you what, this really works. It's more important than getting all those questions just right, because I come across very confidently and caring, and they know they're going to be listened to. And that's really important when you're interviewing. So what are some of the ways you can relax yourself? Well, you probably know ways that you can relax yourself, but I'll share a couple. One of them is Amy Cuddy's, and that is in the strong body pose where you have your arms out and your hands are on your waistline, right? So, and you stand there for up to 2 minutes. They say 2 minutes, but you can do it in a minute. It'll work fine. And think good thoughts about where you're going and get your confidence up and your caring and your alertness up and your fear, wipe it away. So another one is the breathing exercise. And I like this one. There's lots of them out there, but this is the one I used. It's the, now what's his name? Maybe I have it written down here. Professor, Dr. I'm forgetting his name. Isn't that terrible? Dr. Andrew Weil. And it's the 4-7-8 breathing. 4, to take the breath in. 7, hold it. And 8, let it out loudly. And I'll just illustrate it. You close your eyes and relax. Think good thoughts. Get rid of the fear. Okay, so you take it in for 4. Whew! Whatever it is that just gets that out, and do it a few times. But whatever it takes for you to relax, that's really what you're trying to do and get yourself in the mood. Now, there's some days when I just absolutely cannot interview, and so I don't waste my time. Keep that in mind too. I've been doing this for a long time, but there are those days. Okay, so listening to the target's response. Since you have prepared your questions and you thought about all the different ways they're going to answer them, and of course they'll answer them in ways you didn't think of, but you've really thought about it all, you can really focus on listening, being active and intentional and not biased, as unbiased as you can be. And the example I have is when I did an interview on Friday the 13th, I was told, we lost this business, and this company, our customer, was very uncommunicative. They were difficult, and we lost to competitor A. And we called into the negotiation team, and they said it was still open. And then the next day, the business team called us and said they had decided on someone else. So they were really very disheartened by this customer. So I was expecting, not unreasonably, that they would be kind of difficult to, first of all, I never dreamt they'd take the call. But when they did agree to the call, I thought, well, they'll probably be difficult and wishy-washy, and well, they weren't. And so that's really the point. You want to keep yourself very open to what it'll be. You can think what it might be, and I did. But as soon as the woman said hello, I could tell she was a friendly soul. That voice was just a dead giveaway. And we did not have video. So just to keep that in mind. Also, I have alert posture down. Don't slouch over. Stand up, sit up, whatever it is. You just come across better. It's physical and it's mental, it's emotional. It's just how it works. Okay, so evaluating the responses. Some people intentionally deceive, and just like there's all that fake news out there, people tell lies too, don't they? And sometimes you can tell and sometimes you can't. But think about it when you're listening to them talk, as you get the conversation going, what their tempo is, what their tone of voice is, how they talk normally. If it changes, that's when you put your little feelers on. Are they lying? Or do they really want to tell me more? Or what's going on? They got emotional about this. I need to probe. And when you don't actually see the person's face and all you have is their words and their tone, in some ways you notice that more. I find sometimes looking at people's faces when I don't know them is disarming, because I'm trying to figure them out. And I don't know their habits. I don't know their body language. Because body language, although we have generalities about it all, body language varies a lot. The example I'll give is just me. I often sit like this. I'm chilly maybe, or I'm just being pensive. Well, according to the pundits, that means I'm not receptive to you. I'm not open to you. I'm closed to you. That's not the case at all. So you really need to understand visual. If you're going to go there, you need to know, ideally you should know the person, although it's really obvious when some people are lying, and I'm not going to go any further, right? We all watch the news. So, and don't be distorted by strong prejudices as best you can. That was the example I just gave. Sometimes people have a bad memory, and a lot of times they'll admit to that, but they don't always. But you can ask a question about, oh, were you there? How long ago was this anyway? Those kind of questions to get at how accurate their story might be. Sometimes they're misinformed, and you kind of have to get past that as well. And it's not always so easy, but when you ask enough questions of people, you can get that idea. Or you can ask them, if you suspect they're misinformed, oh, how did you hear this? Who told you this? What was the source? I'm just kind of curious. And they'll tell you. Others are cooperative to a fault. And by that, I mean they're just trying to be helpful, but they don't really know. We have the others who are know-it-alls who don't really know it all, right? And you can often figure that out pretty quickly and ask if there's somebody else you can talk to after you've thanked them profusely for how helpful they've been, even though they haven't been. But a lot of times they do want to be helpful. They'll get you to someone who actually knows. And inconsistencies in response is another one. And so sometimes you can ask that same question that you asked early in the interview a little later on and see if they have the same answer again. That's what I'll often do. Okay, another set of things is probing the response, because that's your next step, right? You don't want to just take their answer at face value. Well, maybe they're telling you the truth, but a lot of times they're willing to tell you more. So a passive probe, I see, would be my expression that way. And a lot of times when people are explaining the technical elements of the product, that's when I'll go to the I see, because maybe I don't see. And I'll be going down to the developing, tell me more about, and also the responsive one's very fun too, even though you don't have the facial, you can hear it in somebody's voice. And really, how interesting, can you tell me more, And especially when you notice they're pretty animated about it, they'll just jump right in, they will tell you more. And repeating and paraphrasing, that is something I probably do as much as anything as I go through my win-loss interviews. Each question builds on the one prior to it. I have it in that kind of order, although the customer might answer some of the stuff ahead of time. So I skip that question, or I may say, oh, I think you've already answered this. But I do want to make sure I got the right answer. This is what you said. You said pricing was a factor, but it wasn't the factor in your decision making. Well, where did it fit in? And they'll say, well, actually, it was something we weighed, but not as heavily. We really were more interested in the features, and most important, we were interested in, will this solution meet our business needs? That was our number one criteria. And then you might go, well, can you elaborate then a little bit more about what your business needs were? You see how that kind of goes. Silence. Silence actually is one of the elicitation skills as well. And a lot of people aren't so comfortable with it. You need to figure out, as we go through some of this, what you're comfortable with. That's really important, because some of them I'm not comfortable with either. But it allows people to collect their thoughts, and it's good manners. It's respectful. And you definitely need to give people time, especially on these Zoom phone calls where we have weird connections, or the person doesn't speak English very well and they're being nice enough to interview you. They need even more time to collect their thoughts because maybe English is their third language. So all these things to think about. And that's really the reason why you really want to think about what sort of answers they might come up with ahead of time, so you can probe. You're ready to probe because you're listening so closely. Okay, some other probing the responses here. So clarifying. So you mean, and a lot of times I'll do this like, you mean that our sales force really was very, very good, but we didn't win the deal. I'm a little confused about that. Or another one is, you said, what? Really? Did you mean that? And you could use that even with the sales force. You could say, well, what? You gave our sales force a 10? Did you really mean that when you actually selected another competitor? And changing, moving right along. People start talking about things you just don't care about, and they're not relevant. And so you do need to change the subject. I often don't say, I don't mean to change the subject. I'll just say, oh, I'll just change it. But a lot of people like to actually say, I don't mean to change the subject. I think that's kind of like extra words that you don't really need to say, but it's kind of a little textbook, I suppose. Confronting. That happens often enough. I'm totally confused. You've told me that sales was very, very good, and their demo was super, and everything they did was so good, and that you didn't see that much differentiation among the competitors' products. So I'm very confused as to how you decided the way you did. That's kind of the idea around confronting. So elicitation, we're going to just go through elicitation, kind of what it is, kind of what it isn't. And we're going to go through 10 of the elicitation sort of behaviors. And they're all based on human nature. And the human nature elicitation is based on is global. I have used it with a lot of different nationalities because I give talks or I also do interviews all over the world, since English is an international language these days. I speak French, but I don't speak such good business French. So if they speak English, I'll go for the English. But if they're having trouble expressing themselves, I'll ask, how do you say it en français? And we'll get along. But it's a conversation, and so it's not asking questions, although part of it can be that. You can mix and match. But the idea behind it is through conversation that people will voluntarily tell you things without you asking them that question. Like earlier when I said, when I asked that question about, and how, and you were telling me our salespeople were doing so well, did so well, and yet we didn't win the business. And they'll keep going. They'll fill in the blanks, and that's kind of the idea. But you can also ask questions mixed in, but you want to start out conversationally. Okay. So questions versus conversations. And this is sort of the arming versus disarming. When you're having a conversation, when you're asking questions, often people are thinking, who is this person? Why are they asking this question? Do I really want to share this? What's in it for me? And how shall I respond? And where's it going to go? Even though you tell them it's a confidential interview, where's it going to go? And how much do I really want to share? Or do I really want to share it all? There's all these questions that come up when you just ask questions, and that's all you do. And in elicitation, it's more conversational. Okay? So, and here's some of the human characteristics in elicitation that we just know about human beings, fellow human beings. And it doesn't matter where in the world, as I was saying earlier. It's recognition is one of them. People love to be recognized for different things that you can pick up on. And what's so nice is today you can look at their LinkedIn profile, and that's very helpful if they're on LinkedIn. And a lot of people are in business-to-business interviews. They aren't in some of the ones I'm doing now in Australia because the people are, a lot of them, very low in the organization. They're not on LinkedIn. And maybe there's another LinkedIn in Australia. I need to find out a little more about this. But it doesn't matter the nationality. People like recognition. Now, they might appreciate being recognized in different ways depending on their culture. Another discussion, but recognition they like. People kind of like to show off a little bit that they know more than you know. You never want to come across as stupid and have done some research, but if you can let them feel they know more than you, they're happy to show off and, of course, tell you more. People are naturally curious, right? Curiosity killed the cat. It didn't quite kill the human, but it comes close sometimes. People love to gossip. Ah says, man, that gets people talking. And people also love to complain. If you complain about something that you want to learn more about, a lot of times they'll tell you about it because they're complaining about it too. People like to correct you. So if you are wrong or they think you're wrong, they can't wait to correct you as an interviewer. And as a woman, for the women in the audience here, they love to correct us even more because we're women. We have a competitive advantage that way over most men, I think. Emotional hazards. And that is when people get emotional based on what they've shared with you about a great win, or they lost, or somebody passed away. Whatever it is that gets them very emotional, they'll talk. It's just human nature. And people are very bad actually at keeping secrets, and so the between you and me works every time also, which is one of the techniques. And the old aw shucks. By aw shucks I mean, oh, it was not really a big deal that we won this deal, or we did this, we were so charitable. whatever angle it is that you want to them to expound upon, or it's related to something you want them to expound upon, or you just get them comfortable talking. The aw shucks works every time. Okay, so who is most susceptible to elicitation? I always think this is interesting just to cover quickly. And this is generalities, of course, but it's based on sort of disciplines, what people do for a living. Lower levels, because people don't ask their opinion. And I think this is actually coming up to even higher levels in some way because people don't ask their opinion that often. Middle management is very susceptible today. When John Nolan wrote his book about confidential, I think lower level was much more so, but I think they still are, but it goes up to middle management as well. Even though we've had 9/11 and lots of things, why are you calling and all that, but people need to be heard and listened to, and they just aren't enough today. So here are some of the other ones. Professors are great, fantastic. You all know this, a lot of you in the academic environment. So salespeople, excellent. They love to expound upon the products and how it works, and because they want to make the sale, and a lot of them talk too much and when they should be listening. The good ones listen more than they talk. And marketing people, if they're not real suspicious, depends on where within marketing, but like when you go to a trade show, for example, they're all there to sell. So it's a great opportunity to gather a lot of intelligence. And in your space, I know they have trade shows, so that's another great place to use your elicitation skills. At least in generally susceptible. That would be doctors, lawyers, senior visits, anyway, this list. But once you kind of get past, like with lawyers, if you can talk their talk, their lingo, which I'm not quite as fluent in as I might be because I don't work in that space that much. I think lawyers are pretty nasty, although I have family that is, they're nice lawyers. But a lot of them are pretty tough to deal with. But if you know their language and you come into them with their language right away, it puts their guard down pretty quickly, and they can be very responsive. But they're apt, they have their client confidentiality and privacy and all this other kind of stuff to deal with, as do doctors. And that's a lot of the reason they're a little less susceptible. Senior business executives, boy, some of them have just eaten off my hands, and others are pretty tough. Of course, some of them have their secretary admin there. I know one of my friends told me a great story. I can't take credit for it. She was trying to get a hold of this executive, and always the executive assistant would answer the phone. Oh, he's busy. He's this, that, and the other. So she called the main number and had that person paged, the executive assistant. And as soon as she could hear the page happen, she hung up the line on her end and called up the executive, and that's how she got the interview. Resourcefulness helps too. Senior government officials can be a little suspicious as well about these kind of calls, but a lot of people working for the government are fabulous sources of intelligence at lower levels because nobody's asking. And intelligence officers, well, it's interesting. If you're in the same space, a lot of them, which I am, are actually pretty friendly and a lot of fun. So it really depends. But if you're coming in at them cold, they're probably not going to say so much. Okay, so elicitation techniques, you're probably using some of them right now. And in general, as I was saying earlier, just in basic interviewing, you're going from a natural movement from general to specific topics, and that is less threatening in a conversation. That's just human nature. And so you want to always keep that in mind, whether you're asking questions or whether you're doing elicitation. Either way, better to start with the generalities and move down to stuff that's a little more personal or specific, as the case might be. Okay, so let's start out with these 10. Expression of mutual interest. So I really like this one, and I use it a lot because it's so easy today to do so. You can look people up on LinkedIn, and like, for example, I'll give some examples, by the way, between two experiences. One was where I was collecting data in the perioperative world. I didn't even know what that was. That is the operation room where nurses are working, handing out instruments and helping out perioperative. And it was more specifically an interim nurses in that space. That is, not full-time employees that travel from location to location for assignments, maybe 3 to 6 months at a time. Very specific project. And the other one was this call I just had, because it was just so full of great examples by the fact that it went very well, but I wasn't expecting it. And there were a lot of interesting twists and bends to it that nobody knew until I got on the phone with her. So that was pretty interesting. So flattery. In her case, it was very easy because I looked at her LinkedIn profile and she speaks 6 languages, one of which is Russian. So, and the other thing about flattery is, though, if you're just making it up just to be, just to use it and use the person, they can tell. It needs to be sincere. So keep that in mind as well. And I was very sincere about that. I'm very impressed with 6 languages. And English was probably not the second language she learned, and yet she conducted this interview in English. So I was quite impressed. Okay, so confidential bait, that's a really easy one. I'll tell you, honestly, I've just never, you know, make it like a secret, make it exciting, or a lot of times the confidential bait could be something about a competitor. You're talking to competitor A and you know a little nugget about competitor B coming out with a new product, for example. So that's a confidential bait. And they may come back and say, oh, it's not what I've heard. I've heard competitor C is coming out with that, or whatever it is. But that can be very fun in elicitation. Provocative statement. That's coming out with something that, wait a minute, did I skip one here? Yeah, I guess I didn't. Okay, sorry. Okay, provocative statement. Provocative statement. That's coming up with something that gets them to talk and is provocative. So, for example, in this case where I was interviewing this lady last week, I was told that a certain competitor had won the deal. So I said, oh, so I guess competitor P won the deal. And she goes, oh, no, they didn't win the deal. Competitor S did. And I'm like, oh, how did that happen? I was misinformed. And anyway, the conversation really flowed after that. But it was interesting that the account executive was so misinformed in this case. And I guess it was bad communication, who knows, chemistry, people just doing the best they can a lot of times. But a provocative statement, that was provocative, all right. That got her attention. I had the wrong competitor, and she wanted to make sure I got the right one, Another way of doing it when you're collecting data, as I recall with this other one, was I had said, oh, I understand competitor C, and I'm talking to competitor A, just does some consulting along with their interim nursing, this perioperative nursing, but they also do some consulting. And she goes, oh, yes, it's consulting light. They really don't do it all. But here's what we do. And of course, that's what I was looking for. I wanted to know what they do. So these are the sorts of things that you can use. Okay, so simple flattery. Well, I sort of covered that in the very first one. That's why I was thinking I had things in the wrong order. But it actually was, the mutual interest could be travel, but the simple flattery in that case was the language. Another simple flattery one, which is just so easy in the case of this one, these guys were the market leader in the perioperative interim nursing space, and they'd been in business for a long time. So I just simply said, wow, I can't believe you've been in business for 80 years. That's amazing. And where I had a competitive advantage with this woman, to give you a little background of this, because it's kind of amusing. This was cold calling, by the way. And so it's been a number of years ago, and I had called the main switchboard and told them what I was up to and wanted to talk to someone in sales. But since I didn't have a specific territory, I was instead referred to the senior vice president of marketing. Well, as it turned out, I had gone to their website before I started these calls, and she had a video of who she was and what she was all about. If any of you remember Dress for Success, that's what this woman looked like. She had on the suit, the business suit, not a pantsuit, proper skirt and top, and maybe even a little bow tie kind of thing, I mean, it was so conservative. But she had an ego that didn't stop. And so that's all it took. Yes, we are the market leader. We've been in business for 80 years, and here's what we do that other people don't do. And It was simple flattery is all it was. Um, so naive mentality, that's another one that's always interesting to me because a lot of people assume that means you don't really know what you're doing. No, it means you don't know as well what you're doing as the other people do. You want to let them feel they're helping you, a leg up kind of thing. They know more than you do, but you're not stupid. If you're stupid, it's gone. You need to talk their talk to some degree, etc., but not stupid. You know, like for example, with the perioperative one, I said to them, well, you know, I've done a lot of work in healthcare over the years, but you know, I'm less familiar with perioperative, how this business works for interim hiring. Maybe, you know, maybe you could explain some of that to me because I would really like to know more about it. And, you know, so it showed that I worked in healthcare, so I'm in the space, but maybe I don't know quite as much about perioperative, which is really a very narrow niche. And there's a shortage of perioperative nurses. There's a shortage of nurses, period, but in the operating room. And there's very poor education in nursing schools in this area. A lot of nurses learn on the job. These are the kind of things you learn as you go along. Okay, opposing stand. That's a fun one too. And that example actually I gave early works pretty well. I understand you don't do any consulting and focus only on interim hiring for the perioperative nurses. And that's what I've heard. And, you know, right away they'll come out and, oh no, those people, it was kind of fun too. And the woman had said to me, well, that competitor, they just do consulting light. And by what I mean by that is they provide a nice hotel room for their employees that are their interim nurses, and they give them a bottle of wine to welcome them, and that's about it. They don't really consult with them at all. They don't give them any guidance. Here's what we do. Or I've also heard competitor B does this and that and the other. So by taking an opposing stand a little bit, disbelief, and I think these two are very related to each other, but they're not exactly the same. So the unbelieving attitude is kind of like, you've got to be kidding, you know? And actually in this last one, when I found out that I had the wrong competitor that won the deal, I didn't say you've got to be kidding, but I said, oh, really? You know, like that. And the woman said, well, yes. And she proceeded to tell me why. And in a couple of reasons, it was product and price. And so she told me a little bit about the product, and I said, oh, I still don't really get it. Well, in the end, what she also told me is this competitor who won the deal was also already doing business with the company in an area that was very, that matched what they were doing right now. They were looking to get into pricing, and they already were in a segment which was very helpful to pricing. They'd already were providing them with a service that would work very nicely with it. Of course, nobody knew anything about that until she told me about it. So, and quid pro quo is the next one. And quid pro quo means I'll tell you this if you tell me that. And that works very well when you're talking about competitors. And, you know, like this lady who I got connected to and freaked out about because I was expecting to talk to someone in sales instead of a senior vice president of marketing. Because I thought, well, she'll never help me. And she really grilled me and then was mush, told me everything. But she grilled me. She made sure. So part of the grilling was she wanted to know who else I was talking to for this opportunity. So I told her. And I said, and this is what they're saying about you. And, you know, so, and this is what I learned about them. And we went back and forth. And she actually shared quite a bit about what they did and what they had heard about competitors, some of which I knew wasn't right because I'd already had my information, but, you know. Okay, purposefully erroneous statements. Now, I'm not really comfortable with telling lies. I'm not Pinocchio, like this guy on the screen. but I am very comfortable with um, saying something that I know is off when I suspect the person is not a good person to be talking to, that they're not reliable. I will state something that I know is false to see if they correct me. That's how I use it, you know? And because sometimes you've been told this is a really good source, and as you're talking to them, you think, I don't know. I don't think they're that good a source. They don't seem to really know what they're talking about. And what they're saying just isn't agreeing with other sources who I thought were experts. And I've talked to several of them. So I'm kind of wondering. That's how I use this. Some people purposely lie. I'm not comfortable with that, but it is one of the ones that people use. So like I was saying in the beginning, you need to figure out what you're comfortable with. Your ethics, your morals, but also your style, right? Oblique references. This is one I never use, but I figure I ought to mention it. It's a reference like to something you want to learn more about, but you don't really exactly get to it. So for example, you might want to know more about, are they laying off in human resources or some part of the company, but you can't really ask that. And you don't really know for competition what they're doing. So you just say something like, oh, actually, in these hard times, well, now we have hard times, the coronavirus, we've been laying people off in human resources. So it sort of hints, and a lot of times they'll come back and say, so are we. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for what's happening here. It's not my favorite one, but okay. This one I absolutely love. Exploiting the instinct to complain, complain, complain. People just love to complain. And I didn't use it in my interview with this lady on last Friday, but I did use it a lot as I was cold calling, and I with this other client. You know, I used it around how these nurses get treated. You know, I understand it's a really tough way to make a living because they're always traveling away from home, and I hear lots of complaints about how they get treated and get mistreated, by the management team that's hired them. They just send them out there and then they're on their own. They don't have any really good guidance to get them started on the job. They just, you know, put them up in a hotel and tell them what hospital to go to and who to talk to there and let them go. And, oh, we would never do that. I can see why that would really be a problem, though. Our competitors do that, but we don't do that. Just sort of people love to complain. They just do. And the harder the times, the more they do it, right? So we have a lot of ammunition these days. So, and bracketing techniques. That's one I particularly like too. I use it towards the end of my discussion. This is often when you're asking things about pricing, and you don't always get the answers you're looking for. Sometimes they won't tell you. Like this lady the other day, when I was talking to her, I asked her, how she had told me, yes, that the guys I were talking about, the price was high. And that was probably one of the reasons they were, and that was one of the reasons they were eliminated. But at the same time, she also said, but our management said, don't worry about the price because we can negotiate that down. Think about whose solution is going to be the best for our business needs. So that's what she had told me as we had gone through the interview. But towards the end, I always have a question about how to pricing factor in your ultimate decision making. So she then told me, well, we were told about the solution thing and all that, but it did factor in. And so I said, well, you did mention that, the guys who hired me, that their price was higher. Was it a lot higher? Was it 10% higher, 20% higher? She said, I can't say. But a lot of times they will say when you bracket it like 10 or 15%. The same thing when you ask about age. People maybe don't want to tell you they're 45 years old, but you might say, oh, you're between 40 and 50. That's all the customer's looking for, really. They're looking for, if it's a consumer kind of thing, they're just looking for some ballparks. And here's my very favorite one. I've already mentioned it before, but it's worth repeating. My favorite one is silence. And a lot of people aren't so comfortable with that, who are interviewers, because they feel like they have to fill all the space up with conversation and chatter. And that's why people who are a little more introverted are often better interviewers, because we don't mind silence. I'm kind of a blend, 50-50, maybe a little bit more towards the introverted side, but I have the extroverted side as well. But I love silence. It shows respect. It allows people to think. And when people ask me questions, because sometimes when I'm interviewing something, they have a question for me too. I'll sit there a little minute and think about my answer too. Because they'll ask me, well, why are you doing this? For example, when I do win-loss interviews, why aren't the companies doing it themselves? I would have told them the same thing that I'm telling you, which they'll often say at the beginning of the conversation, but by the end, I know they've told me stuff they would not have told that person. But that's okay. So silence. And I'm just going to say this in closing, you need to think about how you're going to make people feel in the end. And that's really what's so important in all of this. When you interview people, when you're looking for information, you need to think about how you're making them feel. Never make them feel used. Make them feel very like they're doing the right thing and they feel good about it. So thank you very much, and we'll go from there.